Well, good afternoon, all you Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Dharma treasures. And as I always like to say, you future corpses that keeps that impermanence thing first and foremost in our minds. And I say that, but as I was kind of putting all this together, realized that we had our last Zazenkai was November, but the one before that was July. And it was the day my brother died. And I was given the gift of just sitting with my brother and no talk, no face-to-face. And that was truly a gift from the Sangha. So yeah, impermanence. So thank you all for your participation in this Zazenkai. We're a small but mighty group, and it does take a village, and it's taken our whole little village to pull this off. But each and every one of you has had a part in creating this container for us to sit here at Crow's End. And well, I've got to tell you, hopefully you got a little look outside at the bamboo when it was being lit from behind as the things were lightening up. It was spectacular. We're very blessed to have this space to sit in. So as always, we pause just for a minute to put our hands together to acknowledge and honor our Native American heritage. And as you know, it's the Northern Chumash in this region, our home, their home. It's the Yakitutu Yaktahini, Northern Chumash. So we give thanks to them for caring for this land. They were here for thousands and thousands of years before us. And their presence is still being felt. I read this is a while ago, I think a year or so ago. I think all the new dorms at Cal Poly, something must be happening. Got beeps. At Cal Poly, the new dorms have been named with Northern Chumash names. So acknowledgement is one thing, and recognition, and hopefully there'll be more. So today I picked out a story, this Ryonen story. It's from The Hidden Lamp. And Kanjo, I have a stack of books right outside the door. If you would bring those to me. And the full title is The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women. And this one was particularly important to me in that, here, I'll just put them on the other side. Thanks. In that my teacher, Roshi Igyoku, wrote the commentary on this particular case. And Ryonen's story has always struck me. Since I started at ZCLA, because we chant her name. We chanted her name this morning, as a matter of fact. And so I'm going to share that with you. As a young woman, Ryonen Genso was an attendant to the Empress and was known for her beauty and intelligence. When the Empress died, she felt the impermanence of life, and she decided to become a nun. Ryonen traveled to the city of Edo, which is now Tokyo, and in search of a Zen teacher. So the first teacher she met with refused her entry because of her beauty. Then she asked Master Hakuo Dotai, who also refused her. He could see her sincere intention, but he too said that her womanly appearance would cause problems for the monks, male monks in the monastery. Afterward, she saw some women pressing fabric, and she took up a hot iron and held it against her face, scarring herself. Then she wrote this poem on the back of a small mirror. To serve my empress, I burned incense to perfume my exquisite clothes. Now, as a homeless mendicant, I burn my face to enter a Zen temple. The 4 seasons flow naturally like this. Who is this now in the midst of these changes? She returns to Master Hakuo and gave him the poem. He immediately accepted her as a disciple. Eventually, she becomes the abbess of his temple. And when he died, and then later founded her own sangha. So this opened a lot of things up for me. I'll get to that a little bit more in a minute, but as I often am inclined to do, research the heck out of things. So hence all of this material. I gave a very similar talk. I used this same koan or story at White Heron Sangha in a talk not long ago. Speak to that in a little bit as well. So in this, then I'll be sharing a lot of texts from the research that I've done. And I had like months to prepare for that talk. So I really got into it, even though this is a little intimidating being here in front of a professor of philosophy who does this kind of stuff for a living. So one of the other books or references was Zen Women, Beyond Tea Ladies, Iron Maidens, and Macho Masters. Another really good book. And they kind of flesh it out. They bring more to the story than just this short story that I just read. And Ryonen Genso, so we're talking 1600s, 1646 to 1711, right? So this is after Dogen, considerably, a number of hundreds of years behind Dogen. So Fusa was her birth name. The parents were tied to the imperial court. That's the reason she became kind of the friend or taking care of the empress, who later dies. There was an arranged marriage. This is the rigid class system of the Tokugawa era. And we know for a fact, so this is historical. This really happened. She was a real person. This isn't just legend. But some of the actual details of her history are a little bit sketchy. So we know she had a son for sure, but probably a daughter as well. She actually wrote to this daughter as well. And the reason it's a little bit up in the air is that her husband actually had a concubine as well, who had children. And so I guess they're not sure of the blood lineage of all the kids, except for the son. She left the marriage after 10 years, and that was prearranged. And we don't know all the specifics or the details about that either. But she had this burning, this yearning to have a spiritual life. And so somehow there was a contract done, maybe a prenup, an early prenup, I don't know. So she shaves her head when she's 30 years old and is given her Dharma name, Ryonen Genso. And that means comprehension, simmering, original entirety. Comprehension, simmering, original entirety. And so she goes into the only thing that was available to her at that time, which was an imperial convent, all women. After 6 years, she is really dissatisfied with that and with the women's temple, and she wants to train. And the death of her childhood companion, the Empress Ryonen, after that, she developed this resolve to explore the meaning of our transient life. So she starts applying to the male monasteries because she wants to train with a Zen master. So as the story that I already read, she goes to one, and it's actually a very famous Zen master, and gets turned down. You're just going to cause too many problems here. And it should be noted that in this book, Ryonen is the only nun presented in the Hidden Lamp who is better known to history than the master who taught her. The only one. She had quite a reputation. So the modern day Zen teacher, a modern day Zen teacher, Hisamatsu, calls this her story, her decision, a fundamental koan. And that is, when nothing will do, what will you do? When nothing will do, what will you do? Well, Ryonen did the deed. She scarred herself. And that was not that uncommon in those days. There's another famous female Zen ancestor who actually did the same thing in order to get into a male monastery. So this story brought up a few things for me. One is just this story of women in Zen and in Buddhism in general, and then kind of women in our world. And then the other is that this sacrifice for practice. What do we sacrifice for practice? And there's a great irony here that I'm sitting in a room with all men. And I know each one of these men in this room has a significant other that is a female and is a very important part of each of our lives. The irony is that when I was kind of using this same story at the White Heron Sangha, there was about 20, 25, maybe 30 people on Zoom and in person, 95% of whom were women. Clay was there, another guy that I don't really know, another man. And so it'll be interesting to see how you receive this versus the women of the White Heron Sangha. I did, again, in part of the research, what came up was looking at Ananda and how women first came into the order. And I did a whole talk on this. I don't know who of you was there, so I won't, do the whole thing. But basically, Ananda helped women come into the order because Mahapajapati Gautami had approached, and this is his aunt who raised him. She approached him, not once, not twice, but 3 times, just saying, I want to start an order, not even to come into the male order, but to start a group of women. Bukinis. And he turned her down every time. Well, she was pretty distraught. And each time the quote is, do not be eager, Gautami, to obtain the going forth of women from home into homelessness in the Dharma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata. Now, I have to say, I feel her pain in that when I wanted to ordain, I had to go through my teacher, Roshi Yagyoku, 3 times. Most of you have already heard that story, but finally got in. So out of compassion, Ananda hears what's going on. At one point, there was a story where they traveled from Kapilavatthu to Vasali, which is a couple hundred miles. And Mahapajapati, Gautami, was following along. And she was on arrival. She stood outside the gate of the monastery, and it says her feet swollen, her limbs covered with dust, with tearful face and crying. And Ananda saw this and asked her, what's up? What's the matter? And she tells the story. So Ananda is going to intercede. And Ananda has been Buddha's attendant, I don't know how many years, but a couple of decades. And so he goes to Gautama Buddha 3 times and gets the same answer. No, don't jump at this. This is not a good thing. And then he decides to use the indirect method. So he approaches the Buddha again. And he asks the master, is a woman able to gain the fruit of stream entry, or of once returning, or of not returning, or of arhatship, if she leaves the household life and enters into the homelessness in the Dharma and discipline of the Tathagata? The Buddha affirmed this. Thereupon Ananda rephrased his request. If a woman is able to do this, Lord, and moreover, Mahapajapati Gautama has rendered great service to the Blessed One. She is his aunt, his governess and nurse, and nourished him with her own milk after his mother died. Therefore, it would be good if the Blessed One would allow women to leave home for the homeless life in the Dhamma and discipline of the Tathagata. So the Buddha caves and lets that happen. Now, in his defense, they say that the sutras say an awakened one's mind cannot be changed because he is always in touch with absolute reality. What happened here was solely the same event which all Buddhists encounter, because all of them had established an order of nuns. The whole incident was not meant to prevent the founding of the female branch of the order, but only to strengthen by that hesitation the message that this brought great dangers with it. So that was the Buddhist story, and Ananda and Gautami. And as we usually do in our lineage, we check out what does Dogen have to say about this. So this is Dogen 1200 to 1253. And there was a great piece that was written by Michiko Yusa, and in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages at Western Washington University in Washington. And she had a piece that she wrote, Dogen and the Feminine Presence, taking a fresh look into his sermons and other writings. So this was really interesting. And you can imagine, I think after we've studied Dogen a lot, but you can imagine what he said. He was thoroughly immersed in the spirit of the Mahayana teaching, embraced the worldview that all beings are destined for Buddhahood, including plants and insects. So the message, this is the message actually that's proclaimed in the Lotus Sutra and many other scriptures. As regards to his position on the matter of gender, he was unequivocally, is that right? Unequivocally egalitarian. And at the start of his career as a Zen master, he said, male and female, the noble and lowly, everyone can understand and embody the Buddha's teaching. Later in another writing, he said, what is so precious about being born a male? Space is space, 4 elements are 4 elements, 5 skandhas are 5 skandhas. The distinction between men and women is also thus. Both genders attain awakening. What you should pay respect to is the person who attains awakening. Whether this person is male or female is beside the point. One of the restrictions, and we've talked about the precepts, and the Mahayana monks, they had like 250 precepts, about how to live, how to eat, sleep, to poop, everything. And one of those was they're taught to avoid eye contact with women. which is, they say, is a flagrant violation of the Bodhisattva vow. So in response to that, he said, what faults do women have? What virtues do men possess? Say you vow not to look at women, and yet you chant, sentient beings are numerous. I vow to save them all. Are you not perchance excluding women from the category of sentient beings? If so, you are not a bodhisattva, nor are you exercising compassion. The notion of avoiding to look at women is nothing but the words of a drunken madness uttered by Shravakas. So he's not pulling back at all. Now, that spirit that he held of the equality of women was not a popular thing back in his day. And I think of even current time, things are changing, certainly, but the author said that maybe the seed was kind of planted. But all I remember, pictures of the subservient women walking behind men. I don't know how that's current, but in my day, that had actually happened when I was younger. So skipping forward to our time, there was another great piece. This is another book that I recommend, When You Greet Me, I Bow, Norman Fisher. So he has a section in there, a chapter that's called The Sorrow of an All-Male Lineage. And he tells his story. He was teacher at Tassajara at the time, and in the mornings they would be sitting and he would be doing face-to-face, dokusan, they call it. And so it's in the quiet of the early morning. In walks this woman, young woman, and she was a short timer there. She hadn't been visiting very long. He hardly knew her, but she said she was very impressive because he remembers her as really large and tough looking, covered with tattoos. And she rode a motorcycle into Green Gulch. So she sits down in front of him, as is the practice, and she starts weeping. This big, tough woman starts weeping. And so he's kind of confused by this. And he asks her, well, what's going on? And she was talking about the chanting of the male lineage, which has been done there at Green Gulch and all the monasteries here and in Japan forever. And she said, because every name is a man's name. That's the way things were. That's pretty recent history. And it really struck him there. I mean, he really felt this. He really felt her pain. And out of that encounter, he helped develop the women ancestor list, or a women ancestors list, which is now the standard of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association in America. Now, closer to home for me was Roshi Gyoku's story, my teacher. And most of you know Roshi Gyoku. And when I first heard about this, about her creating what we now have at CCLA, I was heard it was out of anger, basically, that she had back up. She's in her Dharma transmission week. When you do a Dharma transmission week, you are sequestered and you are doing bows to the lineage 3 times a day. And I can't remember how, it's like, I don't know how many bows that we're doing, but it's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bows. And it's 3 times a day. And then you make rounds to all of the altars and you do bows there as well. So I had heard through the grapevine that she was during her Dharma transmission week, which is interesting, it was at vacated Sacramentine order, a convent that and the Zen peacemakers had taken over. And I've been there. It's in Yonkers. And so I had heard, she was just pissed off and just said, Bernie, what the hell, where are the women? Well, I wanted to confirm the story. So I talked to Roshi Gyoku. And she said it was not in anger. She asked Bernie when he checked in, as the teacher, transmitting teacher does, a couple times a day, they say, how you doing? And she said, where are all the women? And he replied, you find them. And again, this was not done out of anger at all. She said, we were both in deep samadhi. And my question arose from that place. And so did Roshi Bernie's response. She said she found it validating, encouraging, and empowering. Then later, Jishu Longyo Holmes, who was married to Roshi Bernie at that particular time, and was one of Roshi Bernie's successors as well, co-founder of the Zen Peacemakers with Roshi Bernie, she began to do a search for women as well. And they were calling them then the matriarchs. She made a matriarch quilt with the names of the ancestors that they put together. So Roshi Gyoku started her list, which is the list that we chanted today, that we chant every other day at ZCLA. And she took it from various sources. The San Francisco Zen Center chant on the Prajna Paramita, and that's another whole sutra. And this book is Mother of the Buddhas, Meditations on the Prajna Paramita Sutra. And another great book, and I'll talk more about that later. But she also took them from our own koan stories that she had known, that she was familiar with, and then our own White Plum Asanga lineage. So there wasn't that much published at the time. And when they first started chanting this at ZCLA, she said people cried a lot just hearing the names of women. And she said, hearing the names of women so deeply buried for too long. So several years later, she was at a teacher circle, and that's a group that we meet occasionally every couple of months right now with all the teachers at the Zen Center. And she reviewed the list very carefully and came up with the certain descriptors that you hear in our chanting. And she says, I do not see our chant as a lineage, rather an endless spiral of women ancestors, constantly emerging, including, and giving life. And so on her trip back from New York to Los Angeles, 34,000 feet in the air, she puts together the kirigami. And those are kind of the documents, like when we do a Dharma transmission during that week, you're also doing all these kirigamis, these notes. These were supposedly the secret doctrines, right, that about how to do service and all these actually tremendous things. And you hand copy your teachers, and it's voluminous. Takes a long, long time. So it's not all done during your Dharma transmission week. It's done before that as well. But she wrote this while she was flying back at 34,000 feet. I love our koan system in that whenever there's a woman involved, she's usually one-upping the man, the male, the teacher, the Zen master, whoever it might be. Most of the time, they're nameless. We don't even have their names. And one of my favorite is the old women's rice cakes, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard. So this is particularly for you, David. So there's this great scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and it is Daishan Swanjian. And he's pretty full of himself. He was a pretty smart guy. He was supposed to be the #1 authority on the Diamond Sutra, and he hears about this sudden awakening group in the south of China. He's from the north. And so he's going to go down and set them straight. So he's en route, and he comes across an old woman who's sitting on the roadside selling tea and rice cakes. And he asked her, "Who are you?" She responded, "I'm an old woman selling rice cakes." When he asked if he could buy some refreshments from her, she inquired, "Venerable priest, what are you carrying in your bag?" He said, "I'm a scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and here I have all my notes and commentaries." Hearing this, the old woman said, "I have heard that according to the Diamond Sutra, past mind is ungraspable, present mind is ungraspable, and future mind is ungraspable. So where is the mind that you wish to refresh with rice cakes, O scholar? If you can answer this, you may buy a rice cake from me. If not, you'll have to go someplace else for your refreshment." He was dumbfounded, couldn't come up with a reply. So the old woman directed him to a Chan master, Zen master, close by. It's said that Deshan burned all his notes and commentaries the very next day. And this nameless Zen master, female Zen master, is one of the reasons that we always say at the end of the service dedications, "And to all the women ancestors whose names have been forgotten or left unsaid." Another great book that I ran across, this was The Zen Priestess and the Snake, a woman's path of transformation and healing through rediscovery of the great mother tradition. And this is Roshi Shinko Perez. She is the abbess of the Maitreya Abbey in Colorado. So she's married to Gary Shishin Wick. And that name should be familiar with those of you that have been head trainee. He did the translation for the book that we use, that the head trainees use to pick their koan out for their hosen. And it's the Book of Equanimity, Illuminating Classic Zen Koans. So this is a true story of Roshi Shinko, of her making her way and having some real issues on her journey in this male-dominated Zen world. And one of the descriptions of the book says that the Zen Priestess and the Snake is a powerful, true story of a woman inspired by her visions of the sacred feminine. And Roshi Shinko actually has some visions when she's a very young girl, and then has others throughout her life. Her experiences of encountering the mother goddess gave her the strength to overcome the challenges she faced as a woman in this Zen hierarchy. So as she's a trained archaeologist, so she kind of goes back when it's said that the feminine role, feminine aspect in culture was stronger. I can remember sitting with Krishnamurti, who some of you may know, philosopher, Indian philosopher, down in Ojai. And I remember this discourse he had with a woman who was kind of questioning some things, and it was somehow related to, men and women. And Krishnamurti is listening to her intently, and then he says, "Well, let me get this straight. So you want to lower yourself to the level of men?" So the Prajnaparamita Sutra that I just talked about, it's the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. And in Sanskrit, this is the perfection of wisdom, this prajna paramita, or perfect wisdom. And in Sanskrit, the term is in the feminine gender. So prajna paramita also becomes the name of a goddess, referred to as the mother of all Buddhas, who is the embodiment of the perfection of wisdom. And you may recognize part of this. This is how we begin the women ancestors when we chant hymn to the perfection of wisdom, homage to the perfection of wisdom, prajna paramita, the mother of the Buddhas. The lovely and the holy perfection of wisdom gives light. Unstained, the entire world cannot stain her. She is a source of light, and from everyone in the triple world she removes darkness. Most excellent are her works. She brings light so that all fear and distress may be forsaken, and disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She herself is an organ of vision. She has a clear knowledge of her own being, of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. The perfection of the wisdom of the Buddhas. The Buddhas set in motion the wheel of Dharma. And then we go on to chant 81 women ancestors, starting with Mahapajapati, who finally got into the club, so to speak. And Ryonen Genso, of course, is in that list. And the description that Roshi Gyoku put in, Ryonen Genso, who sacrificed her beauty. So this brings up the point for me when I was reading this or researching it, was this idea of inclusivity. And that's been a big part of my own practice, is kind of widening, who's in the club, right? That's a terrible way to put it. But I remember what came up for me was one of Bernie's koans. He has a book out where his transmission folks, his Dharma successors, have put together their experiences with or instances of relating with Bernie, and they made them into koans. So one of those koans talks about when he makes a Catholic priest a Zen teacher. So that's Robert Kennedy, Father Kennedy, who just celebrated, I can't remember which birthday it was, 80 something, maybe 88. We celebrated it during the White Plum Sangha. Well, he got a lot of flack for that because this is bringing an outsider in. And so the Zen community of New York was giving him grief. So Bernie faced them down and asked them, are we one or are we not? Bernie's interconnectedness, inclusivity. So who do you accept? Michael Moran, who went in with me, he was the president of the White Heron Sangha for many years. I used to go into CMC with me. And we would have this kind of routine with the inmates there about, so who's in your circle? Questioning those. So the guys that are in our circle, literally sitting in a circle in the interfaith chapel, they can kind of get that. Well, can you expand that further? What about your cellmate? Sometimes that was good, sometimes not so good. What about all the men in your yard, all the inmates? What about the guards, staff? And usually there is this, guards are the bad people. Can you bring them into your circle? And kept going on and on. Roshi Gyoku did the same exercise with us at ZCLA. Derek, I don't know if you were there at the time. It was just like, who's in your circle? It's one thing, we've got our families. So yeah, that we're comfortable with that. But how far can you expand that? How far out can you go? We've got lots of challenges today answering that question politically? Are the opposing political group in your circle? How far can you expand? Who's included? And of course, Roshi Yagyoku, and we're just saying, well, everybody is in the circle. You may not like who's in the circle, but everybody is in the circle. And when I was reading about that, have you heard of the overview effect from the astronauts? It just really struck me. It's an actual thing. It's a cognitive shift that affects some of the astronauts and cosmonauts when they see the Earth from space. And many say they no longer identify after this shift. They no longer identify with a specific nationality or culture after seeing Earth from outer space. Instead, they see themselves and all citizens on Earth, men and women, as one people, living on one world. So this overview effect has been documented by numerous astronauts and, as I mentioned, cosmonauts. And they describe seeing the Earth from space firsthand is like seeing a tiny, fragile ball of life hanging in the void, shielded and nourished by a paper-thin atmosphere. And some of them have gone on to engage in global philanthropic works after they return to Earth. There's a great film, a documentary called Planetary. It was, astronaut Ron Garan. He spent over 128 days in space. So he's created this philanthropic group called Fragile Oasis for astronauts who've experienced similar philosophical shifts. So he writes a book about it, and then this becomes this documentary, which, this is so interesting, which investigates the phenomenon of the overview effect from the perspective of scientists, ecologists, philosophers, and Buddhist monks, who all share a common belief: the Earth is one world and we are one people. Well, I have my own really strong feelings about women in Zen and women in general. And I really think that this is what's going to tip us in the right direction, ultimately, is the feminine perspective. And I'm not alone. Not that I'm anybody, but the Dalai Lama, not long ago, it was the 2009 Vancouver Peace Conference, where he said, the world will be saved by Western women. And I think that's too narrow myself. I think it's by awakened women. And I think of the awakened women that I know, and that many of them come to mind. My own teacher, Wendy Egyoku Nakao, Pema Chodron, Tara Brock, Roshi Jan Chosenbei, the co-abbot of the Great Vow Zen Monastery, who I had a wonderful opportunity to spend a lot of time with when Carla and I were up there. Enkyo O'Hara, the abbot of the village Zendo, Roshi Joan Halifax. So we do have a number of models, I think, that are helping to lead the way. There was a woman, Joan Ewing, I think, is an American author, and she studied Tibetan Buddhism under the Karma Kagyu lineage. She said the loss of feminine qualities is an urgent psychological and ecological issue in modern society. It is a painful loss in our emotional lives and a disastrous loss for the safety of life on Earth. In women, it affects her central identity, and in man, it affects his ability to feel and value. The loss of the feminine in man causes him to feel moody and lonely. In women, it causes her to lose faith in herself. We are slowly awakening to the crisis of the earth and the effect of the loss of the sacred feminine. But few people understand that the causes of the crisis have spiritual values at their roots, values of the sacred as immanent, imbued in all life, and all life as interdependent. It is by empowering the sacred feminine and by listening to the earth as she cries to communicate with us that we will ultimately heal. So how do you feel about that, man? And the other thing that came up, and I'll cut this a little shorter than what I had planned, but was this idea about sacrificing for practice. Now, fortunately, nowadays, we don't have to scar ourselves with hot irons, to get into a male Zen monastery. But how much are you willing to sacrifice? And what do you sacrifice? Buddha, of course, as we know, left his whole family, who ironically ultimately became part of the group. They ended up becoming his disciples. Roshi Gyoku's story is just amazing. She was in her mid-20s and experienced some profound stirring within. And it was her husband at the time that dared her, because there was this sesshin, a week-long sesshin, that she was thinking about going on. He bet, you're not going to be able to do that. So he bet her. Well, she went. And it turned her life around. She said, there arose within me a powerful force seeking to know itself. And in a short time, she leaves her marriage, career, and home, and instinctively follows this call. So she likewise left everything. We always know about Bodhidharma's, or we hear about Bodhidharma's first disciple, Wike, cutting his arm off. I don't know how true that is, but cutting his arm off in order to show his sincerity. So what is it that awakens so powerfully within that compels you to act as you only can, to know the truth of your unique life? In her commentary, she asks, what would you be willing to sacrifice in order to awaken and find freedom? What would be too great a barrier? Ryonen, before her death, wrote this following death poem. This is the 66th autumn I have seen. The moon still lights my face. Don't ask me about the meaning of Zen teachings. Just listen to what the pines and cedars say on a windless night. What are the sounds of crows on a summer afternoon at Crow's End? And I'll finally end with a comment that Roshi made in her commentary. And there's no doubt that the deeper we plunge into this awakening, the more expansive is our awareness and our caring, and the more we are called to address the conditions in which awakening can rise. Ryonen had her own temple and built bridges and schools in service to her community. Today, the moon still lights our faces in the here and now, and we all must work to be of service on behalf of the well-being of others. So, how about you? In what ways is your practice broadening the heart, serving others, helping to transform your home, your community, your organizations, and the world? Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. I vow inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody.
think we need to announce it. There are more people, but I think we'll just go ahead.